They didn't throw stones, didn't yell, didn't protest. They just laughed. And in the cold, clinical air of the Celestia Space Center, where the lights never flickered, where each floor tile was imported from Italy and numbered, their laughter rang out like a sentence. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, as a blade aimed directly at the woman who had just stepped through the sensor-triggered glass doors. She said nothing. With her low ponytail, plain white t-shirt, faded jeans, and worn-out sneakers, she looked entirely out of place among the crowd people wrapped in Swiss watches, genuine leather wallets, and eyes trained to scan and reject anything that didn't belong to their class. A security guard approached. His black suit was crisply pressed, a clear earpiece in place, his voice low but firm. "You're in the wrong zone. The ISS Technical Showcase is for high-clearance guests only. The souvenir shop on the ground floor might be more appropriate." She didn't reply. Her eyes met his for just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then she walked past, without a word, without once looking back. People watched her. Some snickered. Others pulled out their phones. A few live streams were already up and running. Candace Vale, the daughter of Celestia's vice president and a media darling in the space industry, narrowed her eyes as if spotting a stain on a red carpet. She wore a custom-made flight jumpsuit and a diamond-studded watch so heavy it could be used as a weapon. Her voice was soft, but the venom beneath it was unmistakable. "Oh my God, look at that backpack. Who let logistics staff into the strategic control center? Has anyone called security yet?" Laughter broke like a dam. Every comment was a slash to the air. Remarks like, "Someone get her back to the lost tourist zone," or "Her shoes are so worn, I can see her dignity leaking out," echoed through the room. But the woman, the one mistaken for a janitor, lost in a utopia built for wealthy dreamers, still didn't react. She walked past the simulation chambers, stopping before an ISS control station. Her eyes scanned every screen, every model, every detail, not with the curiosity of a tourist, but with the gaze of someone who had touched them. For real. Yet, no one noticed. No one had the patience or the humility to ask, "Who is she?" 3 hours later, Celestia would come to a standstill in sheer shock. The same people who had mocked her shoes, scoffed at her cloth backpack, and broadcasted their ridicule live would be forced to face an irreversible truth. This woman wasn't just an honorary guest. She wasn't just a systems architect for the simulation center. She was the one who had once saved a real space station in orbit. And today, she hadn't come to be honored. She came to measure just how low the dignity of the so-called elite had fallen. Inside Celestia Station, the atmosphere glittered like a blockbuster movie premiere in the heart of the cosmos. Silver-blue light from space station models reflected off confident faces, perfectly powdered and smiling at just the right frequency for social media. Yet amid that light, the shadow of Harper Vale moved quietly, like a scratch, across an ultra-clean glass pane. No one dared touch it, but everyone wanted it gone. She stopped in front of the EVA simulation board, the area designated for extravehicular activity training. Only those with Level 5 access were even allowed to stand nearby, let alone interact with it. A nearby group fell instantly silent, then burst into laughter as though someone had just cracked a cruel joke that was perfectly on brand. A man in a navy blue suit, with a senior investor badge from a space tech venture capital group pinned to his collar, stepped forward. In his hand was a large tablet, its screen reflecting his smug expression. He pointed at Harper as if she were an alien object. "This circuit board is probably a bit too complicated for you. Or are you here to dust it off and snap a selfie for the logistics crew's Facebook page. He roared with laughter, and the group behind him applauded like an audience at a cheap comedy play. That shirt looks like a donation from the Red Cross. Your shoes like you just escaped a war zone. And the backpack, I feel bad for the cosmic wind that has to brush past it. A nearby intern tried to stifle his laugh, but failed once a space influencer fired up a live stream, turning the camera toward Harper. The man narrated gleefully, "This is Celestia's simulation hall, where real people learn to reach for the stars. And her, maybe she's learning how to reach for the break room lunchbox." The hashtag #SpacePretender began trending, followed by a cascade of laughing reactions. Harper stood still. The air-conditioning breeze in the simulation hall gently lifted her hair. She didn't turn away, didn't move, just kept her eyes locked on the data panel as though the mockery around her was merely a faint fog that didn't concern her. No one noticed that look in her eyes, not angry, not hurt, just the gaze of someone who knew she was far above this crowd in every way, yet chose silence. Candace Vale arrived as if the scent of blood had summoned her. She wore a freshly sponsored jumpsuit from the world's most expensive spacewear brand, a sapphire-studded watch on her wrist, her hair neatly pinned like she had just walked off a photo shoot. She strode straight to Harper, blocking her path, smile flawless, but her eyes dripping disdain. "Let me be clear so you won't embarrass yourself. This place isn't for broke dreamers. Celestia is for those who actually have a shot at orbit, not someone with a torn backpack playing make-believe like it's a middle school science fair." The room exploded in laughter. One person joked, "Anyone got a janitor badge? Looks like someone needs to return to their rightful station." Another tossed a guest pass at Harper's feet, like spare change. The cameras caught everything, the lights, the humiliation, and a lone woman standing in the center of it all without flinching. Anyone else might have cried. A weaker person might have screamed back or fled, but Harper Vale did none of that. She simply bent down, picked up the pass at her feet, turned it over in her hand, and calmly placed it on the ISS simulation console, like returning mediocrity to the place it belonged. What no one realized in that moment was this: it wasn't Harper who had been diminished. It was them, with their laughter, their ridicule, and their inhumanity, who had begun to tarnish their own dignity before the eyes of a world watching through live stream. While the laughter echoed across Celestia Station like a warped chorus, Harper Vale stood still at the eye of the storm, a storm that needed no wind, only words cruel enough to crush any person's dignity. But she didn't collapse. She didn't react. She simply observed. Her eyes didn't look at the people, but at the structure of the simulation module ahead of her, as if every insult around her was mere background noise, incapable of disrupting the mental frequency of someone who had once orchestrated life beyond Earth's orbit. No one realized it yet, but every word they uttered, every smirk they flaunted, wasn't diminishing her. It was making them look more ridiculous, more hollow. In this polished space of Celestia, among hundreds of expensive suits, haute couture dresses, and gleaming leather shoes, Harper, with her worn sneakers and plain white tee, was the only one who didn't need to pose, didn't need to puff up to prove anything, and so the only one not trapped in the collective performance. Candace Vale began to feel uneasy. She was used to making people cry fluster or apologize profusely, but the woman in front of her, who neither cried nor flinched, was making her falter, like throwing a stone into a lake and failing to make even a ripple. Nothing to say. Candace asked again, her voice higher than usual, placing extra emphasis on the word "say," as if trying to force Harper to utter something, anything. Harper simply shook her head slightly, then turned toward the EVA simulation console. She placed her hand on its outer frame, as though testing the structural integrity, a simple gesture, but one that made the people around her uneasy. There was something in that calmness that silenced the hall for a few seconds. Just a few, but enough for a young engineer nearby, the one who had laughed the loudest, to start coughing awkwardly. A live-stream influencer quietly ended their recording. Outside the central hub, a few senior managers began whispering into their headsets, eyes fixed on Harper, not with disdain anymore, but with something closer to caution. Harper's silence wasn't submission, nor was it fear, it was complete control, and it began to shake an arrogant system's confidence in itself. Without saying a word, Harper had started peeling back the layers of false prestige wrapped around titles, badges, ranks, and hashtags, masks they all wore. And because she didn't speak, every insult hurled her way now felt embarrassing and backfiring. They were monologuing, cursing at empty space, exposing their own pettiness with every word. A timid intern crept up to Candace and whispered, "Who is she? I don't think she's here by accident." Candace shot him a glare, but then hesitated, glancing back at Harper for the first time that morning, saying nothing more. Harper still stood at the simulation station. She tapped the data screen with the ease of someone familiar. One gesture, one light swipe across the auxiliary panel, one glance landed precisely on a line of code that only someone who truly understood the system's design would recognize, and the entire hall still hadn't realized. They weren't evaluating a stranger. They were being tested. Every word, every action, every burst of laughter was being remembered, not by a camera, but by the woman silently re-evaluating the very system they thought belonged to them. When Harper's silence became too unsettling, the crowd did what the cowardly always do best. They turned her into a public joke. None of them truly understood who she was, nor would any admit they were afraid. All they knew was this: she needed to be controlled. And the quickest way to extinguish her presence was to force her to crumble under the spotlight. Candace Vale seized the moment. Her voice was sweeter than usual, but her eyes were cold as liquid nitrogen. If you're so fond of the simulation station, why not try the advanced EVA module? Everyone deserves a shot, right? The crowd immediately burst into applause as if it were a generous, noble idea. But everyone knew Celestia's EVA challenge was the hardest simulation of them all, designed to break even those who'd trained with NASA. A young entrepreneur live streaming exclaimed, "Perfect. This stream is going to explode. What should we call it? Janitor tries to be an astronaut." Laughter rippled again. An influencer tapped their screen rapidly. Vacuum Dreamer, Eva Fail, and Space Clown began trending in less than 3 minutes. They didn't need her consent. They just needed her to fall. And the cameras would take care of the rest. No one stopped it. No one considered the consequences. In their minds, Harper was already condemned for her scuffed shoes, for her worn-out backpack, for the silence they couldn't stand. A silence that made those addicted to applause feel exposed. Harper stepped toward the simulation chamber as if taking a morning stroll through a park. No sign of worry, no effort to justify herself. She didn't need to act composed because she truly was. She adjusted the harness on her suit like a seasoned veteran who had done it 1,000 times. She checked her gloves, secured the straps, and stared at the control panel without blinking once. Outside, Candace whispered to the operations engineer, "Set the difficulty to maximum. Don't worry, everyone knows it's just for fun." She smiled the smile of someone who believed the world would always be hers because it had always applauded her. Inside the simulator, the scene instantly transformed into a zero-gravity nightmare. A loss of control, emergency oxygen leak, misaligned modules, disoriented navigation, and flashing red alerts. This wasn't a challenge. It was a kill shot, wrapped in choreography. Outside, spectators raised their phones. They wanted to capture the moment the overconfident woman failed. One even shouted, "Someone grab a puke bag, she's about to spin like a mop in space." Laughter surged again, peaking like a wave bracing for the fall. But inside, Harper heard none of it. She didn't need to, because she wasn't trying to pass a challenge, she was at home. Her fingers moved across the control panel with frightening precision. No wasted motion, no pause to think. She didn't need time. This simulation was one she had personally designed 4 years ago, back when Celestia's system was still under construction. She knew every line of code, every leak schematic, every hidden flaw, even the ones junior engineers hadn't discovered yet. Outside, the timer ticked. 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute. Some spectators began to frown. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't crying for help. She wasn't failing. Candace clenched her fists. An engineer whispered in her ear, "She's executing everything perfectly, not a single error." Another activated a backup monitor, eyes wide. "She's fixing the system faster than the auto-recovery program. This isn't a glitch, this is—" And he fell silent. Harper was nearly done. She sealed the chamber, stabilized the trajectory, silenced the alarms, activated the secondary guidance system, and resolved all failures in exactly 28.4 seconds. There was no more laughter. Only phones are slowly lowering, eyes stunned, and Candace, the one who tried to make Harper a joke, stood frozen. No one understood what had just happened. But there was one thing they all knew beyond doubt. That moment was no accident. It was skill. It was composure. It was mastery. And they, the ones who mocked, had just been exposed. When the simulator chamber door slid open, the woman in the plain clothes stepped out. Not hurried, not proud, not the slightest bit concerned, with the stunned eyes closing in around her. Harper Vale removed her gloves and gently rotated her wrist as if she'd just completed a routine task, nothing worth noting, nothing worth remembering. Yet in that auditorium, no one could look away. Every movement Harper made now felt like the strides of a general walking across a battlefield she had just masterfully commanded. Celestia Station froze. No more laughter, no more cheering live streams. The same people who had mockingly clapped now clutched their phones in silence, too stunned to hit record. On the massive screen behind her, the system replayed the action logs, every move, precise, zero errors, not a second wasted. A senior engineer, once dubbed the golden brain of the project, stepped to the auxiliary console, face pale as if he'd witnessed something that defied reason. Trembling, he repeated, "She just handled an advanced EVA emergency scenario in 28.4 seconds. No backup, no auto-assist. She even selected the optimal recovery sequence that only the original system designer would know." His voice drifted through the room and disappeared into a silence as still as water. Then, like a collective reflex, hundreds of eyes turned back toward Harper, not with disdain, not with sarcasm, but with sheer astonishment and a trace of fear. A senior NASA advisor, who had been watching from the front row, slowly made his way toward her. His silver-gray suit caught the overhead lights like a relic from a noble age, and his voice carried the weight of a lifetime of service. "That was ISS Protocol 6. Oh, an emergency navigation and repair sequence not yet released outside internal circles. You just executed it, more flawlessly than the theoretical simulation." He paused, looked directly at Harper, and said, with the certainty of someone making history. No one knows it was you, because you never put your name on any of the credit boards. But today, they will. Every camera turned, every live stream came back online, but this time, not to mock, but to capture the collapse of prejudice, the awakening of a system that had believed human worth was printed on business cards and stitched into lapel logos. Candace Vale, the one who had strutted like the queen of the cosmos, now had nowhere to hide. Her lips trembled. Her hand clenched the diamond-studded smartwatch as if it could dissolve the shame climbing up her throat. But no one was looking at her anymore. The lights, the lenses, the attention had all moved on. She was no longer the center. The center now stood over there in a plain white t-shirt and scuffed sneakers, the only woman who had made Celestia Station fall silent, in reverence. Then Harper Vale lifted her gaze and locked eyes with Candace for the first time. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a clarity that cut like crystal. She spoke not loudly, but each word struck the air like nails driven into steel. You dream of being an astronaut. I have nothing against that dream. I just don't want someone like you touching the systems that keep others alive out there. The room held its breath. And then thunder, the first clap, broke the stillness. No one knew who started it, but in seconds, the entire auditorium erupted in a storm of applause. The very people who had laughed at her now stood up to cheer her. Those who had tossed passes at her feet bowed their heads to the one they once thought unworthy of being there. 28.4 seconds. Too short for an average person to complete that simulation, but more than enough time for Harper to flip an entire rotten system on its head. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need revenge. Her presence, her composure, her mastery, her quiet strength was the clearest indictment of them all. When the last clap faded, Celestia Station sank into a different kind of silence. Not the silence of contempt like before, but the silence of shame. The silence of people realizing they had humiliated a legend out of ignorance, arrogance, and blind confidence. A journalist quietly stepped forward, holding a worn nameplate that had fallen from Harper's backpack when she entered the simulator. He stared at the faded metal engraving, its paint chipped away. Dr. Harper Elaine Vale, lead EVA architect NASA, 2013-2020. Rows of engineers sprang to their feet. One of them stammered, "Wait, she's the one who designed the emergency protocols for the Alpha Trident mission, the one who remotely controlled the EVA module when contact with the Russian crew was lost. She's the one who wrote the foundational code for this entire simulation system." The auditorium felt crushed under the weight of realization. The mocking words from earlier about worn shoes, a white t-shirt, and an old backpack now rang out in memory like lashes of self-inflicted disgrace. A product development director at Celestia muttered under his breath, She's not a stranger. She's the architect of everything we've built, only we never saw it." Candace Vale was no longer admired. She stood frozen like a statue. Her sparkling watch, her designer jumpsuit, her perfectly coiffed hair, none of it now symbolized anything but the wreckage of superficiality. Her lips moved as if trying to say something, but Harper's eyes, no longer cold, just silent, cut off any attempt at an excuse. A senior advisor from Celestia's board of directors stepped forward. An old man, his silver hair and weathered face carried the weight of decades. He looked at Harper as though seeing a reflection of his younger self. He bowed, truly bowed, and spoke to the room. "Dr. Vale, on behalf of Celestia Station, I offer my sincerest apologies for letting this place become a circus instead of a center for science. We didn't know, or rather, we didn't bother to learn." Harper said nothing. She simply placed her hand gently on the EVA simulation console, The same console where she had just shattered records and where she had once spent years optimizing systems for real missions in space. A few young engineers began whispering to each other, their eyes shifting from confusion to sheer admiration. They had studied her protocols. They had patched her original code. But they had never met her because she had never asked to be recognized. A trembling tech journalist raised a mic. "Why didn't you say anything? You could have stopped all of this from the beginning." Harper lifted her head. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips, neither proud nor mocking, just the smile of someone who understood exactly how the world works. She replied, her voice low but razor-sharp, "I didn't come here to prove anything. I came to see if this place was still worthy of the people dreaming about the stars." That sentence hit like a meteor. No one had a response. Heads bowed. The room fell still. Candace turned away. The diamond smartwatch, once flaunted across social media, was now silently removed and shoved deep into her pocket like a quiet confession of a failure too vast to undo. Some of those who had live-streamed earlier quietly deleted their videos, but the internet does not forget, and the public doesn't stay blind forever. Within hours, the hashtag #JoshOrbitQueen climbed to global trending #1. Screenshots of the insults once thrown at Harper were shared by the thousands, captioned with "Who are you laughing at? The woman who designed your lifeline," and Harper. She didn't need a phone. She didn't need applause. She simply lowered her gaze, gathered her gloves, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and walked out of the station as if no revolution had just occurred. But every step she took across Celestia's polished floor echoed like a funeral march for the arrogance of a system that once believed it was the center of the universe. Celestia Station was no longer what it once was. In less than 24 hours, since Harper Vale stepped out of the simulator to stunned reverence, a domino chain began to fall, and with each toppled piece came the downfall of a name once tied to power, privilege, and contempt. Candace Vale, once the public face of Celestia, was erased from all marketing campaigns. The video mocking Harper went viral across every platform, emblazoned with a blazing red caption mocking the woman who wrote the code that saves your life in space. The hashtag #UshOrbitQueen dominated social media, while Candace Crash became the symbol of arrogance undone. Investors who had thrown access cards at Harper's feet were stripped of their voting rights. Operations directors, those who had sat idly and laughed while she was humiliated, were suspended pending investigation for professional misconduct. Engineers who once smirked as she touched the console now bowed their heads while walking past the hall where her name, Dr. Harper Elaine Vale, was newly engraved on the station's Hall of Honor. An emergency press conference was held in Celestia's main atrium. For the first time in the station's history, the executive board publicly admitted its failure. They announced an unprecedented decision: Harper Vale would be granted full authority to restructure the entire simulation program and the astronaut engineering selection process. From now on, every candidate would have to meet a triad of criteria defined by her knowledge, psychological resilience, and moral integrity. As that declaration was broadcast live, millions across the globe watched with emotion, not because they wanted to see someone fall, but because they were witnessing something all too rare in the modern world: justice. But not justice driven by vengeance. Justice grounded in dignity. Harper didn't stand at the podium. She appeared only at the end, like the final note anchoring an entire symphony. White t-shirt, faded jeans, those same worn sneakers, except now no one dared call them tattered again. They were relics, symbols, a quiet reminder I was underestimated, but I was never unworthy. A reporter asked her, "Why didn't you sue? Why not retaliate?" Harper smiled a light, genuine smile, as if she had waited for that question all along, because I don't see the point in spending time dragging others down, when I can use that same time to lift others up. The room rose in applause, not the kind given to a performance, but applause as a promise that from today on, this place would change, because of her. Then Harper stepped toward the central control panel, the one with a symbolic keyboard no one was allowed to touch except the original founders. She entered a string of commands. Across the massive display appeared the line Celestia Flight Division, Simulation Protocol 6.0, reprogrammed by Dr. Harper Vale. No one needed an explanation. Everyone understood. She hadn't just fixed a simulation. She had rewritten the operating principles of an entire world. And the miracle of it all was, she had done it without ever raising her voice, without a show of force, only with unwavering silence, knowledge, and a heart that never stopped believing in the worth of human beings. The world watched. On the main screen of Celestia Station, once used to display orbital models, EVA command chains, and space maps, there now stood the image of one woman, not because she was isolated, but because everyone else had stepped back to give her the stage. Dr. Harper Elaine Vale, once dismissed as a lost tourist from the gift shop, once mocked live on air, now stood on the central platform before thousands of engineers, scientists, international press, and the very people who once deemed her unworthy. There were no spotlights, no graphic effects. It was Harper's stillness in her gaze, in her breath, that held everyone captive. She didn't thank anyone. She didn't clear up the misunderstanding. She simply said what needed to be said, and every word struck the room like a meteor crashing into a prideful system. I didn't come here for an apology. I didn't come to reclaim my reputation. I came to remind those orbiting their own self-importance that in space, what keeps you alive isn't stitched onto your uniform. It's in the hands you overlook, because they don't glow. The entire auditorium fell silent. Harper looked directly into the camera as if addressing each viewer beyond the walls, those who had once been dismissed for not fitting into premium ecosystems, who had been excluded for lacking the right style, who had bowed their heads, thinking that silence meant defeat. She nodded gently, then continued, her voice quiet, yet etched like stone into the ceiling of Celestia. If one day your child travels in space, if one day you sit at base, terrified because you've lost contact with your ship, pray that the person who wrote the code to save their life wasn't chosen for speaking beautifully, but was someone like me, someone you once laughed at because of her scuffed sneakers and plain white t-shirt. There was no immediate applause, because the room was still holding its breath. Then a single clap. One person, then two, then the whole room. But it wasn't explosive. It was slow, steady, deeply respectful. The applause given to a woman who had spent her entire life silent, keeping others alive, and who for the first time had spoken, not to demand justice for herself, but to create opportunity for those who would come after. On social media, your Orbit Queen reached 100 million mentions in a single afternoon. Harper's words were laser engraved on NASA's Hall of Honor. Celestia renamed its main command center Vale Command Deck. Space training centers worldwide integrated Protocol 6.0 into their curriculum, with one new mandatory requirement: on every application must have shown at least one act of kindness when no one asked them to. Harper Vale didn't need to rewrite history. She simply walked into it, just as she had walked into Celestia that first day, quietly, steadily, without anyone clearing a path. And when she left, the same canvas backpack still on her shoulder, the same worn sneakers on her feet, but every step she took left a permanent mark on the stone floor of a system that once believed it stood above everything. The story of Harper Vale is not merely a stunning reversal in the world of aerospace science, it is a profound lesson in dignity, prejudice, and the quiet power of integrity. In a society where appearance, status, and prestige often overshadow true worth, Harper was a thunderclap against collective arrogance. She didn't shout for fairness, didn't flaunt her achievements to earn respect. She simply walked through their scorn and let her excellence answer everything. The greatest lesson here is this: never underestimate someone simply because they don't look like you, and never mistake silence for weakness.